Perfect. Today, we are, this panel, Victor, if you can go to the next slide, is being facilitated by Dr. David Caspi. He is an attorney and has his PhD in criminal justice. He is also our esteemed chair of our Department of Administration of Justice here at Southwestern. So I'm going to turn it over to David to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Genesis. Yeah, thank you, obviously, to all the panelists that showed up. I'm going to keep this quick because I know the time is limited and we want to get all the questions in because that's what this is really about. We have, information or knowledge is power, and oftentimes in class we talk about topics related to criminal justice, the full spectrum of criminal justice, but we don't always get into the process of how you get from being a student to being somebody within the profession. And so we have a diverse array of professionals here, which I'll allow them to introduce themselves as well. But just very quickly, we have Lieutenant Don Redmond from the Chula Vista Police Department, Officer Carlos Eddington from San Diego Police Department, Agent James Nielsen from U.S. Borders and Customs. And then we also have Watch Commander Alicia Carson from SIS Security. And with her is Liz Karmelich, I believe, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who is with their recruiting arm of the SIS Security. And so thank you for everybody, because I know to the panelists, everybody's very busy and they're volunteering their time here to benefit our students, and so we sincerely appreciate that. And so the way I would like to begin is if each person, and I can sort of identify who should go first if that helps, to talk a little bit, introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their current role within the organization that they serve. And I think Lieutenant Don, since you're first on my list, we'll let you go first.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here and participate with us today. I'm Lieutenant Don Redmond. I've been with the Chula Vista Police Department for 24 years. I've been a watch commander or a lieutenant for the last 7 years, and I've held a variety of assignments throughout my career here at the PD. Currently, I oversee our special projects and our UAS program, our drone program. Prior to that, I oversaw our dispatch center and our jail, and I spent 5 years overseeing our professional standards unit, so I'm very familiar with our hiring and how we get candidates that are successful through the program. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Officer Carlos Eddington.
Yes, my name's, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. So my name is Carlos Eddington. I currently work for the San Diego Police Department, Southern Division. I'm a community relations officer. And essentially what that means is I establish bonds with the community that otherwise there might not be time for during radio calls, your typical radio call. So that's currently what I'm doing now.
All right, thank you very much. And then we will go to Agent James Nielsen.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I think the screen probably changed over, so I'm going to assume I'm live. All right, I'm Border Patrol Agent James Nielsen. My current role is I'm the National Recruiting Training Coordinator and Technology Liaison. So it's my role to facilitate training for recruiting across the United States, as well as working as a liaison to Salesforce so that we can track and make sure that we're getting the best applicants through our system. Prior to this, I've been in the patrol now since 2008, and it's a great career. Prior to this, I've had the opportunity to work in strategic planning, and I actually did ARC maps, GIS work for about 1.5 years. I've also worked in public affairs, so I've been on national news outlets, local news outlets. I've got to see the other side of the spectrum outside of the law enforcement from more of a reporting standpoint. And now I'm doing recruiting besides obvious field work and things of that nature in Eastern County, San Diego. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you very much. Watch Commander Alicia Carson.
Hi, everyone. As he already said, my name is Watch Commander Alicia Carson. I'm with the SIS Security company. I started my journey with security about 6 years ago when I had a piqued interest in law enforcement. That was when I really actually started. I actually started off as a Southwestern College student majoring in criminal justice. And so that's really where I got my start to go into security. I've worked for several security companies like Allied Universal, Allied Barton, G4S. I was started off as a security officer. I went into information security where I worked in a global intelligence unit as well as a GSOC. And now I've moved to SIS, where I started off as a supervisor here and worked my way up into the watch commander position, which I am currently here now. So it's been a awesome road.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't know, Liz, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So I am a recruiter for security industry specialists. This is my first position in which I'm recruiting for security, but it's been a fun journey over here. I have about 5 years of recruiting experience, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about our recruitment process, or if you're interested in working with us, you can speak with me afterwards.
Great. Thank you very much. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper and start talking about more about the agencies, the different organizations that you work for, and how they might compare and contrast, and maybe what led you to that organization. And for the students, we have local law enforcement, we have a federal agency, and we also have from the private industry. So you have a pretty good spectrum in terms of different employers, potential employers. So I'm curious if you could, one of the panelists would be willing to start to talk a little bit about the organization itself, some of the aspects that make it perhaps different from some of the other organizations, as well as what drew you to that particular organization.
I can start.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So as you guys know, I work for SIS, Security Industry Specialists. I started working with them because it's now one of the best security companies I've actually worked for. SIS prides themselves on working with high-end contracts. That is the first thing that stood out to me going into the application process with this company, because generally all the other security companies typically branched off towards a lot of different contracts, but this is the first one that I've worked with that is more toward high-end contracts, such as like the Oscars, Chanel, Apple, Amazon, just to name a few, is some of the contracts that we hold. And so we pride ourselves on committing to provide wow factor to all the clients by treating everyone as if they're a CEO. This company stands apart from all the other companies due to the dedication we have to our staff. We are not officers, we are not guards, we're specialists because we specialize in what we do. When John Spizak, who is the founder of the company, when he created it, he didn't actually want to go into security because of the negative connotations it holds. However, he got into the business to create careers for everyone interested in making security a stamp in their life. So whether that be a start for somebody or an end goal, SIS, it takes those who share the same passion as us to provide a professional and outstanding work environment. That's what I appreciate the most about SIS. They're definitely, they take care of you more than I've dealt with in the past when it comes to security.
Thank you. Anybody else want to offer?
Sure, just some basic information regarding, this is Officer Eddington again with San Diego Police. Mm-hmm. Some basic information from us is we're obviously one of the local law enforcement agencies that's one of the biggest around here. We have 1,700 officers, annual budget of over $500 million a year, and we're regarded as one of the safest cities in the country, but interestingly enough, we rate as one of the lowest officers per citizens at approximately 14 officers per 10,000 residents. So, you know, it's difficult to say how we reach that point where we have the least officers per capita, but regarded as one of the safest cities, I think it's just smart policing. We're well regarded around the country as being pretty advanced when it comes to the talks recently, which are very important, of de-escalation. I mean, we've been on that forefront for a while, and that was in my academy. We were teaching things like that, and that was 12 years ago. So it's a good When I went to Southwestern College Academy, for anyone who might be attending now, that's where I went through. And once I graduated, I basically applied only to 2 agencies, National City and San Diego Police. Ultimately, both of them gave me a call back, but it just seemed like the better choice to go with a larger agency and increase opportunity for advancement, which ended up being the case. And now I'm here speaking to you guys. So it's a great agency. It's treated me well. I probably didn't take the most direct path that most people do, or I'm not at least normal in the sense that I was born in Mexico and in Tijuana, eventually immigrated to the US, becoming a US citizen, and I joined the police department. I went through the academy again at 19, joined the police department. I've been here ever since. So they've treated me well. It's a very accepting department. If you're interested in applying for an agency locally, I mean, I couldn't say one bad thing about this department.
All right, thank you very much.
And I'll,
Go ahead.
this is Lieutenant Redmond, so Chula Vista Police Department, and everything that was said is true about San Diego Police Department and San Diego County in general. We're very fortunate that all of the law enforcement here in San Diego County are really top notch in everything that we do. Chula Vista Police Department, we're the 3rd largest department in the city, well behind San Diego PD and San Diego Sheriffs. But I always feel like we're really on the cutting edge of technology. You know, we're launching drones from the police department and from the hospital to respond to calls for service. We're using a lot of technology. But for everybody that is interested in law enforcement, don't just look at being a police officer. We're hiring dispatchers. We have a jail that we have jailers down in there. We have people that start in as CSOs, community service officers, who come out and they take reports. And there's different ways to get into a police department. And if you're still not real sure if you want to be a police officer or dispatcher or anything, start out at a position that gets you into the department, whatever department that you feel like you like to, that's a good fit for you. Get in the door. And then what's great about law enforcement is you can move around. You know, you start out as a patrol officer working a beat, but then maybe you want to be a detective. Maybe you want to be a motor officer and ride motorcycles. Maybe you want to be a drone pilot, you know, or a helicopter pilot. There's so many different things that you could do in law enforcement. And so don't just look at it as a way of driving around in a patrol car all day for 30 years.
Thank you very much. James Nielsen from the federal side.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what Lieutenant Redmond was saying there when it comes to the amount of opportunities you have in the law enforcement community. CBP is the largest federal law enforcement organization, and just with Border Patrol alone, we're looking to hire positions across the Southwest border from Texas all the way out to California. And you have limitless opportunities. And when I say that, I mean that there are a lot of different job types. I mentioned a few of the things I did, but, you know, obviously there's ATVs. We do have agents that work, you know, in helicopters as well that get dropped in for special scenarios. We have special tactical units, just as a lot of the local PDs, I'm sure, have SWAT units. We have a specialty unit as well. We have a specialty medical unit. So there's a ton of opportunities available to you. And from a federal standpoint, one of the benefits is, especially with the Border Patrol position, is you're going to be very independent. You're going to be insured. The government essentially trusts you to go out there and protect America's front line. And it's sometimes just you for maybe a couple miles. And you're the one there making sure that nothing comes across that border that shouldn't be. So there's a lot of responsibility and integrity built into all of our law enforcement positions.
Thank you very much. All that very valuable and interesting, and all of you touched on things that I wish I could bring you back as a personal speaker for my class to talk about, but we'll try to keep this to about careers and employment. And a couple of you talked about developing experience. So before I get to more of the application side, I'm curious as to what students can do, or if there are opportunities to obtain experience or at least exposure, be them paid or unpaid, within your organizations. Does anybody have those?
I'll jump in first because I think we might be a little bit more open. So we don't, CBP doesn't require you to have any law enforcement experience. So all the experience and training you're going to get from the academy, whether you go in to be a CBPO and work at a port of entry, or you go in to be a border patrol agent, you work outside the ports of entry. We don't anticipate you know anything. You're going to learn everything at the academy, and you're going to get paid while you're at the academy. So you're actually going to become a trainee, a federal employee, and then you're going to go to the academy and learn and as an employee. We don't have any we don't have any regulations that you have to make other than the fact that you have to have 1 year full-time work experience or equivalent hours. And that could be at anywhere. That could be at McDonald's. It shows that you have responsibility. So that's for the Border Patrol position. For the CBPO position, you just have to have 3 years full-time work experience or equivalent hours. And obviously, just with all law enforcement, I'm sure everyone's going to talk about, drug use and things of that nature. So there are obvious restrictions there, but we don't require any other law enforcement experience or anything like that. You'll learn everything on the position.
Just one quick follow-up question, if I could. What about education requirements for the federal agency?
So we just changed that within the last, I would say, 6 months. So currently you would come in as a GL7 level, which up until about 6 months ago, you had to have a bachelor's degree to qualify for. Now everybody is able to come in at that level. So if you do have an associate's or if you do have a bachelor's already, that's going to make it easier for you to promote from the GS12 level to the GS13 level, which is supervisory. That's something that as a supervisor, they typically like to see on a resume, and that's going to give you points toward your supervisory exam. So by having a bachelor's, by having an associate's, you're going to be receiving extra points to promote later on, but you do not have to have any collegiate experience to come in at the ground level. For the OFO position, they still have the 5 and the 7, GS5, GS7. For the GS7, you do have to have a bachelor's and you have to have a 3.0 GPA or better to qualify as the 7. If you don't have that, then you would start out as a 5 and it would take you 1 year to get enough work experience to qualify for the GS7 level position.
Thank you very much.
I can jump in next for our
Sure.
company. Awesome, thank you. So our company does not require any security background. We do look for customer service background, whether it's working at McDonald's, as you mentioned, or anywhere really. It's having those customer service skills. So that's a lot of security is. Some of our sites do require that you have a driver's license, but the site that Alicia Carson works at does not require a driver's license. We just require a California unarmed guard card, which if you have never heard that before, all you need to do is attend an 8-hour unarmed guard card class, and then you get a live scan or fingerprinting done, and you submit everything into the BSIS website, which is bsis.ca.gov. But feel free to message me if you have any questions about that. In regards to promotions and becoming a supervisor or watch commander or higher, we do prefer that you have a bachelor's, but if you have the made-up experience a relevant experience to make up for it, we will oversee that too. But I mean, the more education you do have, we also account for that in lack of experience. So it's pretty easy to get your foot in the door here, and we love to promote from within whenever possible. So there's always opportunities for growth.
Okay, thank you.
So for Chula Vista Police Department, we hire both laterals and no recruits with no experience whatsoever. Our ideally, having come in with your academy background, our chief of police, Chief Roxana Kennedy, was a graduate of the Southwestern Police Academy, and she worked her way all the way up to chief of police from there, and I teach at the academy. We take all levels of experience, depending on what kind of role. If you want to come in as a police officer, you can come in as a recruit. We can send you to the academy, or we hire directly from Southwestern Academy. It just kind of depends on the position that you want to take when you come in.
Similar to Chula Vista for San Diego, we will hire laterals as a Southwestern College Academy graduate, or you can just apply simply with a high school diploma. No college experience necessary, but like anything else, when you're being compared with other applicants, anything helps. Have you taken a ride along before? Have you expressed interest by going to an agency and you know, asking about the cadet program, or again, simply just a ride along? Everything matters, obviously. So any experience is appreciated, but it's not dependent upon it.
Thank you. So that leads or segues well into the next question, which is, you know, when students reach the point where they're ready to start applying, of course, they're going to want their application to pop a little bit, stand out. And so what are the ways that they can do that in terms of be it grades, or if they have or were able to secure an internship or some kind of volunteership somewhere, or part of the application process itself, but what can students to best position themselves, assuming a competitive market?
So I could say for Chula Vista, the application, of course, is very important, but really to move through the process, it's initial interview. We bring them in, and it's amazing how many people our agency interviews who are unprepared. They couldn't answer why they want to be a police officer, or what they bring to the table of why we should select them. They come in, you know, in shorts or t-shirts, and really just not a very professional manner. So what I would really encourage is whatever agency that you apply to or business, do your research, be prepared, do your background, and look sharp when you walk in there, and be professional, because that's who we want to hire. We want to hire professionals right from the get-go.
Hey everyone, that was some good points though too, of people jumping in or people not coming prepared to interviews. I've definitely seen that a lot. As for resumes, our company isn't too particular about what you send in, but I also have been looking at resumes for years prior to working in this company. And the best advice I can give you is to put your resume far away and make sure it's easy to look through. Like, can you easily tell where you worked, how long you worked there, and what some of your job duties were. If you don't have any job experience yet, if you're fresh out of school and you volunteered at school though, you can definitely include any volunteer experience you have, any internships, and you know, the more education and you know, recognitions you've had, also you can put on your resume as well. But there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just, you know, Indeed is actually a great way to build a very simple, easy to make resume, and it'll make it for you. So I suggest that to a lot of candidates who haven't applied yet.
Also, let me just chime in when it comes to resume building. cbp.gov careers, I actually put the link in the chat also. So if you guys click that link, put your information in, you'll get a link to the cbp.gov careers. There's a resume aid on there. Federal resumes are a little bit different than professional resumes. And it might be even similar for the local police departments. From the federal side, we want examples on things you've done. So, you know, I used to do hiring before I joined this position in the private sector, and I typically didn't want to see a resume that went over a page and a half, 2 pages. It's just too much. In the federal government, and maybe even similar for the local PDs, we want to see a narrative format, what you've done. Give examples, provide examples of things you've done. Don't sell yourself short. You know, if it goes a few pages, that's fine. Just really make sure that you give us a good picture of who you are. And that's something that's a little bit different, because in the private sector, it's bullets, right? And it's just kind of highlights. So make sure you're descriptive when you're applying for our positions, and then also make sure that you're not selling yourself short. You know, talk about ways that you've handled challenging experiences, ways that you've handled situations that required you to rely on training that you've had, even if it's just customer service training. Those are good examples to show that you've been a responsible adult and that you're willing to take on a real career.
Thank you. So as we sort of move through the application process, I was wondering if you could, assuming the student or graduate has applied and they're in the process, if you could speak a little bit about the process from time of application to time of hire, and perhaps a little bit about what that timeline looks like. I mean, what are we looking at in terms of how quickly one moves through the process, the different steps of the evaluation after the application's been submitted.
For San Diego, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's going to be pretty similar for both of us, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah. For San Diego Police, essentially it goes the written test, and then it goes to a physical abilities test, pre-investigative questionnaire. You're going to answer some basic questions about your life, your background. Eventually it steps into a background investigation, and then a polygraph examination. Then you have your more formal interview with a lieutenant for the backgrounds unit, then a psychological evaluation. Eventually the last step is a medical evaluation. It all varies on the timeline, varies on a lot of factors, especially your background. If you don't have a lot of life experience, it's probably not a lot to go through, as opposed to maybe joining when you're, maybe later, early 40s, there's going to be a little bit more to go through. It'll vary. Just keep in contact with your background investigator. I'm trying to remember how long it took for me, but I think it was about 5 months from the moment when I first applied to when I received a conditional offer by the lieutenant of the backgrounds unit. But it'll vary again with your life experience, where you've lived. I lived in Colorado and Tennessee prior to coming back to California. So they had to reach out to those agencies and to complete my background. So it varies, but that's usually at 3 to 6 months. And those are the steps that are involved.
And I'll kind of add to that a little bit. We do it pretty much the same, not necessarily the same steps as San Diego PD, but generally the same hurdles going through their the background. What we tell people when you apply to be a police officer, don't plan on having it happen overnight. It's going to take a few months. You have to be patient. You have to, there's a lot of material that you're going to have to produce for your background, how quickly the people respond to your background. If we're going to send you as a recruit to an academy, when does your academy start? So these are all factors on how fast. I don't think I've ever seen a 3-month background for Chula Vista, but probably I would say 5 to 8 months it would typically take to put somebody through a full background through there.
And then I can go ahead and speak for SIS. So our recruitment process is pretty quick and straightforward. Generally, everyone who applies for an entry-level position will get a call, and we will give you a basic phone screen. Often it's myself or another one of our recruiters. And then if you pass the phone screen, we set you up either virtually or in person with one of the supervisors or the watch commanders like Ms. Carson. And then from there, almost everyone gets either hired on the spot or they make a decision within a day or a few days at most. For supervisor and above levels, sometimes that process is a little bit longer, but the specialists often get hired or can be hired as soon as a week after they applied. Well, sometimes it takes a few weeks depending on our recruitment process and when we're holding interviews, but the supervisors don't have, or supervisor and above, I've never seen more than 2 interviews. So it may take up to a week after you've had the initial phone screen, you pass that and push you forward for the on-site interview. And then after that, once you've been given an offer, we do administer a drug screen as well as run a background check. And background checks can clear in as little as a day, and I've seen them take up to 2 weeks. So, but generally we're pretty good about keeping in touch with you throughout that process.
I can add on as far as what happens on site. Because after that process, as she mentioned, you'll come in for a 2-day orientation, which happens on site with our supervisors. And during that orientation is when you'll submit your I-9 documents and and get your drug screening done. And then from there, after the 2-day orientation, which you have 1 day, it's just the basics of SIS 101, so on and so forth. And then after that, day 2, we continue on with the process. By the end of day 2, you're ready to work or ready to be scheduled after that. So it's a pretty quick and easy, painless process.
Thank you very much. I know, Agent Nielsen, I know you're in the process of writing, but did you want to add anything to that in terms of the process?
Yes. So ours is probably going to be the most extended process of everybody here. You're applying to become a federal agent, so you're going to have to go through a background check through internal affairs. Additionally, we have our process broken up into multiple segments. So you're going to take a written questionnaire. You're going to have to come in for an interview, which is an oral hiring board. And then you'll have a medical proceeding. You'll also have to do a polygraph and pass a polygraph examination to become a Border Patrol agent or a Customs and Border Protection officer. And then at the very end, you'll have to do a drug test as well as a PT test. So it's pretty extended. Each segment has its own timeline. We do recommend people that apply to download our app, and then you can actually track and see where you're at in the process. But to give you an actual timeline, if you're a veteran, I would say about 6 to 8, maybe now with COVID, 6 to 10 months. If you're a regular civilian applying, non-veteran, it's going to be anywhere from 9 to maybe 13 months right now. So it's a little bit extra time. But like I said, once you get going, it's a great career once you get in. So you just have to, bear with it with us.
And considering those timelines from the various organizations, are students able to apply, or is it encouraged for them to apply while they're still a student, anticipating that they're going to be graduating a year or 6 months or something like that? That's perfectly acceptable?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And then the other question is, assuming that, this students, they obviously see themselves in you, or their future selves in you. If you could speak a little bit about what makes a new recruit successful or a new employee successful, and what ultimately makes one have a prosperous and successful career. What are the characteristics or the qualities that allow one to thrive in their various organizations?
Well, I can speak to successful going through the program. So for 5 years, I read backgrounds and people who applied, and the successful ones versus the ones that weren't successful. And the heartbreaking part of it is when we're hiring somebody to be an officer, we recognize that everybody has a background. Everybody made mistakes growing up. Everybody was a teenager. Everybody was, went to school and did things that they're probably not proud of. Everybody has those, and we're not looking for a perfect person, because if we were looking for perfect people, we wouldn't find anybody. What typically for us that becomes an issue where we'll disqualify a person is they're not honest. They're not truthful in their background. And it could be something really minor as they apply to another police agency and they didn't get selected for whatever reason, because when you don't get selected, we don't tell you why you don't get selected. So when you apply to Chula Vista, you'll think, okay, well, I had 3 speeding tickets. I'm just going to say I had 1 speeding ticket. And so they'll apply, and our investigators are pretty good. They know, they compare backgrounds, and when they see there's a discrepancy between one background and another, that means you're not being truthful. And a lot of times the things that we're disqualifying people for, we wouldn't have disqualified you for it had you just been straightforward and honest. And when an agency doesn't hire you, it doesn't mean that they, maybe the positions have been filled or they have other people that are better qualified. It doesn't mean that you won't be a police officer, but once you aren't truthful, or you kind of bend what the rules are or what you did, or minimize some of the things that you did growing up, that's the end of the background process for our agency.
I'd agree with the lieutenant, so I won't, there's no need to add or repeat it. But one thing that I would add, though, is our academy is about 6 months long, 2/3 of which is academics, and then 1/3 is physical. Becoming ready for a process, or becoming ready for a career, or even just the academy for any of these agencies, it's never too early to start. And I'll put myself here on a spot. I was 315 pounds playing football in high school when I graduated. So the idea of running 2 miles was, it was non-existent. And so it's never too early to start, because in our academy, you're expected and required to run about 3.5 miles to start. And at the end of those 6 months, you're expected to run about 7. So please immediately right now, start getting ready. If you're interested in a career in law enforcement, start light, fast walking, jogging, whatever it takes, whatever level of physical fitness you're at, just work on it, improve it. You can never stop improving, just so that doesn't hit you as hard as it definitely hit me when I started. You can never start too early when it comes to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could also just chime in, Lieutenant Redmond made a great point. Integrity is everything, especially when you're applying for law enforcement. So I just want to hammer down the point to everybody out here today. Be very honest when you're going through an application process for law enforcement. It's incredibly important because by being honest, you're going to allow yourself the opportunity to have the position. And if you don't qualify for the position, for something that you honestly did do, well, then that's different. But by putting it out there and being open and upfront, that shows that you have integrity, and that shows that if it is something minor, it'll be looked at. Like everyone is saying here, we're not looking for anyone perfect, right? Good luck finding a perfect officer who never had any problems in their entire life. But it's being perfectly honest and upfront is what's very important, especially for us, because we're going to give you a polygraph. And if you're not open and upfront beforehand, when you do take your polygraph, you have to wait 2 years before you can reapply. So make sure you're honest about all the questions that they ask you. And then also make sure you're in good physical shape. This is law enforcement. I don't care what agency or what department you work for. You're going to want to have, there's going to be some physical standards. So if you're not feeling like you're in a good physical shape right now, hey, there's nothing stopping you from downloading a push-up app, a sit-up app, and going outside and just running for a block or 2 blocks or 3 blocks. And then all of a sudden you're doing a mile, right? So just try and get yourself in some level of fitness.
And just one more thing I'll add. When I was interested in this career, I remember reading a lot of things on message boards and just online about having your finances in order, having military experience helps. Having a bachelor's is going to put somebody way above my high school diploma. I'll be completely honest with you all. It really comes down to something that you can do right now is just exercising good judgment. That goes for anything as small as an argument with a neighbor, an argument with your significant other, driving, after you've been drinking a little. These are all small decisions that you can make right now if you really want to do something in law enforcement. It comes down to these little micro decisions that could have everlasting impact and immediately disqualify you from some of these jobs. Exercise that good judgment, because in the end you're being given a weapon that you're going to put on your hip and expected constantly to make the right decision and use good judgment in some of the most stressful situations that I've ever been in. So before you get wrapped up in, I need to have a master's or a bachelor's, that's great. And I take nothing away from all the hard work that goes into achieving those things. But please focus on micro decisions right now that will, no matter what you have, you can be a doctor. And I actually knew someone who was a lawyer, and they applied to Coronado Police. They had an incident 20 years back. It was an automatic disqualifier. So don't seize on the opportunity every day to just do the right thing, use good judgment, walk away from issues which ultimately you have no control over, and do the best you can every day. That'll give you the best shot at being an officer, being a federal agent, working with a great security company. Some of these things can be automatic disqualifiers. It doesn't go beyond that point.
Thank you. So on that point, we have about 3 minutes, so I'll try to make this quick, even though it's not necessarily a short question or one that would be easy to answer. But the students are now in college. They have access to lots of different types of courses, and law enforcement in all its various forms is dynamic and ever changing in the way it's practiced as well as the technology that's introduced. Is there anything that you see on the horizon that you think might be beneficial for students to be doing to help provide them with the skills they might need, whether it's like you were talking about with good decision making, or technology, computers, accounting, or where you see things moving and what might help augment a student's skill set?
I just want to say one really quick one for everybody, and this goes across the board: English, okay? For any law enforcement position, for anything you do in life, okay? Especially here in the United States, you want to be able to communicate what happened properly so you can report it and document it. Documenting what happens in situations is incredibly important in law enforcement. So making sure you have good command of the English language and good communication skills are paramount. Everything else is going to stack on top of that. I'll let everybody else talk about all the other scholastic opportunities that there are that might benefit local agencies and as being an officer. But I just wanted to put that out there for English and speech are very important for communication.
But if I might just jump on that real quickly on that point, coming from the faculty side, and I'm sure part of the English and communication is writing. Have to have good writing skills to be able to communicate the events.
Yes.
And to add to that, it's the same with security. We do a lot of report writing. So definitely communication and even your writing skills is definitely necessary. But the one advice I would give to everyone always is this world is ever changing. Technology is always changing, so on and so forth. I want to emphasize education, because education is going to get you that much higher, because where it's changing, so is the curriculum with education. So you'll always be able to go and find the different tools and techniques needed in order to keep up with the demands that keep coming from an ever-changing world. And in order to get that, in order to succeed in that, I always say education first. Get as much education as you can in the realm that you want to go into, or even just, you know, that you're interested in or passionate about.
Thank you. We have one more minute if anybody else wants to add, otherwise we can relinquish that time to the students' questions. Anything else that anybody'd like to add? Okay, Genesis, I think we're...
Yeah, so there have been quite a few questions within the chat that really speak to like opportunities to volunteer and to intern. I know there are a few mentions about the Explorer program. So if you guys can speak to any opportunities that exist at your various agencies where a student could volunteer or intern or do a ride along at any of your agencies.
You know, honestly, a ride along is one of the most important things, and this is the reason why. I worked as a front counter officer for about 2 years here at Southern Division, and I saw plenty of people sign up for ride-alongs, and then at the end, I would just kind of ask them casually, you know, what'd you think? And it was obvious to me that while there were most that, you know, knew exactly what they were getting into, and they said, oh, this just reaffirms my desire to join a police department and become an officer. There were certainly some that, you know, no fault to them. It was obvious to me just by their look and what they told me that it was an eye-opening experience. And we know that to be true because in some of these academies that we hold, within the first day, we'll have people just drop out. And so a ride-along is important because there's not much commitment. You're simply signing up to go along with an officer on a 10-hour shift, and you can get a taste of it. And it might totally be something that you're not into. You might have a perception of what it is based on movies, media, and then once you're in the actual patrol car answering radio calls with someone, you might go, you know, this isn't actually what I thought it was going to be. That's a lot of paperwork they have to do on any given shift. So ride along would be my first piece of advice.
I see another question about like, how does someone sign up for one ride along?
For us, really quick, San Diego Police, the difficult thing right now with COVID-19 is we've had to close down our substations. But if you email me, and I'll go ahead and type in my email, I will be able to get you to the right people that will set you up on a ride along. You can also contact SDPD recruiting at pd.sandiego.gov, or you can call 619-531-COPS. And that'll be our recruiting unit, which will also be able to set you up with a ride along.
And it's the same for Chula Vista, pretty much the same exact thing. And I can put them in contact with a recruiter to set up a ride along.
Awesome. Quite a few folks in the chat seem to be really interested in the forensics side of the house. So if you can share a little bit about what that career path looks like from entry, and any advice you have for that path.
So we do have a lab here. Most agencies have some sort of a smaller lab, but the Sheriff's Department is the largest forensic lab. We don't have a lot of lab technicians. Usually when they hire, they stay for quite a while because they love the job so much. It's a lot of science, and they all have different backgrounds coming into it. It's just one of those where you can even do a ride along with a lab technician and kind of pick their brains on how they got hired and go from there.
That's great. Some of the questions that I'll do or a few more. Keep the questions coming. One of the questions that I saw in the RSVPs for this were some questions around learning disabilities, medical conditions, even expungements, and what does that look like, and how do those things affect an application into your various agencies?
All right, I'll jump in there. So we have minimum requirements. So whatever your disability is, as long as you can do the minimum requirements, we'll hire you. We have a police officer that graduated from Southwestern College Police Academy, who is a leg amputee. He only has one leg and has a prosthetic, and he's done very well at our department. So as long as you can meet the minimum standards, and that's set by the state, we'll hire you. And was there a second part of that question I may have missed?
There's also things where you covered the learning there's like learning disabilities. Some folks have mentioned also wanting to know about like misdemeanors and expungements and things like that also.
So I'll let James, because you probably have the most the difficult. So we will hire people if you did something as a juvenile and your record has been expunged and everything, but it kind of comes down to we still expect full disclosure on your background. We want to know who we're hiring. We've all made mistakes growing up, and we can overlook something that you did 20, 25 years ago, and you have now 20, 25 years of work experience, a family, and you know, you're doing well in life, and now you want to be a police officer. We don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, for Border Patrol, for the federal side, no felonies.
Yeah.
Depending on the misdemeanors, right? That's what it's going to kind of come down to, and what happened, what were the circumstances around it. There's, you know, this is where if you guys have specific questions about that, I would encourage you to reach out to any of the panelists here, because we'll be able to talk to you one-on-one kind of thing when it comes down to those specific details. But also, you know, all of us here probably do have minimum requirements that you have to make, even if you are disabled. We did have a double amputee from the knee down, and he had those little bow things on below his leg, and he went to the CBP Academy. So, you know, nothing's going to stop you but you, right? So if you can physically meet the requirements, then I definitely encourage you to put in for any of our positions.
Perfect. And then several questions here around becoming a detective. What's the process in order to become a detective?
I'll pick that one up. I just wanted to answer one more that I saw in the chat recently. Somebody asked a question whether their family's background would affect them. As far as I know, and this is a question that can be absolutely confirmed by contacting our recruiting unit. I placed the email in the chat. There would be no effect to your background investigation. I know that there were some issues with my family, and it's something that worried me, and ultimately it did make a difference. So I would contact the recruiting unit for specific questions, but you know, you're not really judged off of the actions of other people, even if they are family. To follow up on the detective portion of it.
Carlos,
Oh, yes.
can I just
Yes.
add to that?
Please.
Totally agree. We all have those family members who, you know, they're our family. We love them anyways. But with that being said, if you're living with your family and maybe your brother is a parolee or is doing something actively, and you're living in that household where there is some criminal activity that is occurring, we will absolutely look at that as part of your background, and that could be a disqualifier. But if you've got family that is doing something and you visit them on the holidays or something, we understand that. But if you're actively with family that is on parole or something of that nature, then we will potentially disqualify you. Sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
Yes. Everything is definitely case by case basis. And then for the detective situation, back when I joined, 12 years ago, you had to have, 10 years of patrol experience, 5 years of patrol experience. Things have definitely changed due to staffing, due to interest in law enforcement, candidates. That is out of the window now. We have detectives as acting detectives right now that have been on for 2-3 years. So after 2 to 3 years in patrol, which is typically where you're going to start, you can begin applying to be a detective, going through the promotional process. They'll usually, if there is availability, place you as an acting detective, which is a detective capacity, just not quite what you're actually promoted as. You'll be working cases. You can do anything. Sex crimes, child abuse, financial crimes. It's the list is endless. So 2 to 3 years of patrol experience, you can most likely at least start to begin your journey into becoming a detective.
Awesome. I'm actually gonna, if I can have all of the panelists, if you can put the contact information for either yourself or your recruiting departments in the chat, that'd be really helpful, because I see there are still several questions coming through for that, and they're asking how to contact you all. So feel free to put that in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Victor.
So everyone, thank you again to our panelists as well as Professor David. Really appreciate you sharing your invaluable information. It is truly awesome to have the opportunity to dialogue, to hear firsthand experience from everyone on the panel, as well as your various situations. And thank you for even sharing your insight that we usually don't get a chance to hear and see. With that being said, me and Genesis, we represent the Student Employment Services Department at Southwestern College. What we do is we specialize in connecting students to employment, internships. We help with resumes as well, interviews, basically, as well as career planning, career exploration. But we are here to assist you. I'm going to keep it nice and brief. If you have any questions about jobs or employment, if you have any questions you'd like to even get a hold of some of our panelists, or even just learn more about the fields that they're in as well, and just have any general questions, maybe you're looking for a temporary job or even a long-term job or an internship, you want to get some hands-on experience, and even get into doing some of the ride-alongs as well, you can contact us. Send us an email, ses@swccd.edu. Though we are not physically on campus now, we're still able to be reached and to contact you and dialogue with you. We have some great new softwares that are coming out as well. We have if you don't have a resume, we have what's called Optimal Resume, which can help you build your resume. We have a job employment, a software coming out called Handshake as well, is going to be released. And we also have some things that we're doing in connecting faculty and students to employment opportunities. So have any questions or interested in jobs, any questions or at all, contact us at ses@swccd.edu. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Genesis.
My last piece here is I just really wanted to thank Dr. Caspi. I wanted to thank all of our panelists for just spending the afternoon with our students and sharing with us their advice, their insight, their expertise. We really, really, really appreciate it. We look forward to working with you all more closely in the future. And if there's anything you need from us, you know where to find us. And with that, oh, one last thing here. For those of you who don't know, you probably saw me had my phone out. I was actually capturing some stuff on an Instagram story. So what you can see here is we are on social media, so we're promoting jobs, internships, and advice to our students. So if you're not already following us, please follow us on the following channels. And with that, Victor, is there anything else here?
As well as for more of our webinars, we post them on our YouTube page as well. So you'll be even able to look back at this again and review it if you have any questions or concerns. That being said, thank you again to the panelists. If you can, just go ahead and throw the thumbs up or the clapping app. Let's just show them some love. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much, Professor David. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.